Greetings. For the 3 people that follow my podcast, that's how I start. Nate Hagens, closer to the edge, John. I like that one. I might have to remember that. Okay, so I am going to talk about the theme of reimagining innovation, technology, your work for tomorrow. But in order to understand tomorrow, we first have to understand today, and we largely don't. John, thanks for inviting me. I will say that John has no idea what I'm going to present. He trusted me to create something for this audience. So this is all on me. This is going to be closer to the edge than you're used to. I'm going to have about 170 slides. I'm going to go fast. There's not going to be time for Q&A. I will be here till 8 or 9 tonight. So let me just start off with a few questions, since this is an interactive format. Show of hands, how many of you are at least minimally worried about climate change? How many of you are moderately to extremely worried about climate change? Okay, how many of you think that if we only had less expensive energy in coming decades, that many of our problems will be solved? Oh, okay. And how many think that a doubling of our GDP, the size of the global economy, by the year 2050 will solve many of our problems? Whoa, didn't expect that. No hands went up. How many of you think that the reason that climate isn't being solved is because there's not enough buy-in from populations or governments? And how many of you think that climate isn't being solved because we don't yet have the right technology? Okay, so I'm going to give a bird's eye view, and maybe 50 minutes from now you'll have some different perspectives on these questions. I'm going to do an introduction. I'm going to talk about the human ecosystem, an academic concept about the economic superorganism. I'm going to talk about implications and scenarios and ways forward for your work. And if I do a good job, I've left myself one of those cookies, but only then. And that's about as funny as this is going to get, actually, because this is really serious stuff. Okay, introduction. So we have an unhealthy situation. But in order to diagnose the patient, we first have to have a diagnosis in order to know what to do and what to reimagine for tomorrow. There's 2 predominant cultural narratives. A Green New Deal, migrate our energy systems to 100% renewable, work towards 0 emissions. Also, business as usual. There's nothing wrong with the past model. There are no shortages of anything. We need to deregulate and reduce taxes. The system story tells a wider angle, a broader perspective, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So there are many experts in the world on various topics, renewable energy, or finance, or VC, or artificial intelligence, or psychology, or all these things. But if you fly up high enough, these are islands of expertise within oceans of incoherence. We don't look at the system as a totality, and these experts rarely talk to each other with a cohesive framework on how things fit together. Okay, so I'm going to briefly do that. The human ecosystem is we have ideas, innovation, which we combine energy and materials into products, into technology. We represent that by dollars or loonies or renminbi. The entire thing generates feelings and pollution. And so I'm going to break these out one at a time. Energy. Energy primacy. There is not a single thing that contributes to GDP in our world. All the goods and services require energy to mine, to invent, to deliver, to manufacture, to maintain, to run, to repair, to dispose of. We need energy to move everything. The average United States household has over 60 items plugged into their houses 24/7. Even if they're not turned on, they're drawing, this is 12% of our electricity is gone just from this. We swim in a sea of energy and we're unaware of it. This is a picture of me on my farm. I do the work on a good day of around 1/10 of a horse. This is my horse Binga, who does the work with some motivation of treats of 1 horse. This is my utility vehicle, which can do the work of 45 horses, and my truck can do the work of 300 horses. The next time you're flying, like I did yesterday, it's 100,000 horsepower, 100,000 horses worth of power are pulling that airline across the sky. This is all because we're mining fossil sunlight, which is incredibly dense and powerful for what it gives human economies. A barrel of oil has 5.7 million British thermal units of energy, which translates to 1,700 kilowatt hours of work. John Stokes or I, working a full workday, will generate 0.6 kilowatt hours worth of work. So a barrel of oil, which is right now 70 US dollars, does 4.5 years of my physical work combined with a machine. So if you add up how much work this does, we use 100 billion barrel of oil equivalents of the main three fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas, every year. At 4.5 years of work, that's 450 billion fossil helpers powering the machines that run the world, relative to around 5 billion real human workers that are not too young or retired. So this has led to the story and the development of industrialization, where we've replaced things that humans used to do manually and with draft horses with machines powered by this stuff that we pull out of the ground at pennies relative to its true value. The looms, steam engine, and now aluminum smelting are very high energy intensive projects. So this is a little bit of a complicated graph, but as innovators, as investors, as entrepreneurs, it's very important for you to understand this in the world landscape. So there's simple and complicated technology. A simple technology is hand milking a cow. And it takes around 30 minutes to milk a cow, and you make, for one person, you make around $5 an hour. Then there's the standard automated milking machines, which use 180 times more energy embodied in the machinery and in the electricity. But because it only requires the human 8 minutes per human, the profits go up to $20 per hour, or the wages or the price of milk goes down that magnitude. Then if we add even more energy, a fully automated milking machine, it goes up to 400 times the energy, then we even have a higher profit of $25 an hour. This is the story of industrialization in our world, and this is where all the profits generate from. It's a combination of technological innovation powered by the carbon pulse. But what happens when energy prices increase? The blue bars are the same as I just showed you. The orange show a doubling of energy, and you'll see in the middle that profits start to go down, and in the high automated milking example, the profits really decline. But when you triple energy prices, another decline in the intermediate example, but now you're operating at a serious loss in the high energy intensive domain. And there are many processes in our world that are highly energy intense, which is why Germany, after the Russian war, is gradually deindustrializing, because things are much more expensive than the expectations that they had before then. So what this has done is globally, it's raised our wages, it's boosted our profits, it's reduced the price of our goods, and it's increased economic growth for more people and created more people. This is a chart of the global population the last 2,000 years. Around the time we found fossil fuels, there was a moonshot to 8 billion people. Not only that, but there was a moonshot in the goods and services consumed by the average person. The average human is 14 times as materially wealthy as 200 years ago. Today's North Americans are 50 times as materially wealthy as the average human was on the planet 200 years ago. So if you multiply those last two things together, the human economy measured by goods and services times number of people is 1,000 times bigger than it was 5 centuries ago. So I have a master's in finance from one of the best business schools in the world, the University of Chicago. They never mentioned the word energy once in the 2 years I was there. In standard economic textbooks, $1 worth of energy is equal to $1 worth of anything else. $1,000 worth of oil is worth $1,000 worth of bike helmets or clickers or cupcakes or anything. Also, economic theory is energy blind. This is a standard circular model of the economy that shows that firms develop things that consumers want, and there's a profit and it makes sense and it's a virtuous cycle. But but this neglects the source of where the main input comes into the process, and the sink, which is that most of the environmental costs of these products are not included, the externalities. So we conflate the dollar value of energy with the work value that it provides, and we rarely include the cost of pollution at all. Our culture is energy blind. And if you look at our species from roughly 300,000 years ago, we were an anatomically, physiologically modern species, Homo sapiens. The carbon pulse, which is when we are drawing down ancient sunlight millions of times faster than it was trickle charged by daily photosynthesis, might look like this from a 20,000 year vantage point. From a few hundred year vantage point, we are alive somewhere between the yellow star and the red star. From a climate change standpoint, we hope we're at the red star. From an economic growth standpoint, we hope we're at the yellow star because it's the carbon pulse that is pushing us forward. So there are two narratives with oil. Well, there are multiple ones, but they're generally two. Drill, baby, drill. More technology will result in more oil. And this is what happened in the United States. We peaked in 1970. There was a long decline, and then high prices led to more extraction. And we just 3 weeks ago made a new all-time high, slightly, in the US, not in the world. But this same graph is represented over here, which breaks out that graph by geological province. The green is conventional lower 48 states. The yellow is Alaska, which is separated by a country called Canada. It's not even contiguous with the United States. The blue is not even on land, it's in the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. And the red is called light tight oil or shale oil. It is in the source rock where all the other oil originally migrated from. There is nothing left after shale oil. Shale oil depletes at 80% or so in the first 18 months, and you have to run faster and faster just to stay in place. This graph shows, just look at the slope of the lines. The white grayish is all the oil fields in the United States that were drilled before 2014 and how much they decline over time. The brown shows the wells drilled in 2014, the green in 2018, the blue in 2021, and what you'll see is the slope of the decline gets steeper all the time. We have to run faster and faster, drilling more wells just to stay in place. So if we were to stop drilling in the United States for whatever reason, for environmental reason, for financial reason, for Wall Street doesn't give finance to oil companies, US oil production would decline at 37% the first year and another 20-some% the years after. So what about technology? What about shale oil overcame the problem of high oil prices? So if you think of a straw, shale oil effectively is a larger straw, which did actually access some more oil, but mostly it was just a larger aperture to get more liquid out faster, and we're that much closer to the slurping sound. But since there's liquid coming out of the top, we don't think about it that way. What about renewable energy or alternative energy or energy tech? A few brief comments on that. First of all, rebuildable is not the right word. An oak tree is renewable. A chicken is renewable. Solar panels and wind turbines are rebuildable. They're no more renewable than a pickup truck. We need to replace them every 20 or 25 years. They have complex global supply chains that are material intensive. Renewable energy is mostly electricity. 80% of global energy use is non-electric. So there are many processes and industrial functions in the world that don't use electricity. The invisible but soon shrinking support of the carbon pulse. At some point here, more technology does not fix the more costly energy problem alone. Higher full system cost means lower economic benefits. Again, if you look at the full cost spectrum of renewable energy, which includes transmission, battery backup, and other things, it's more expensive. If it weren't, why is India doubling their coal production between now and 2030? But that's a full 1 hour presentation on that. Complexity and co-products. We think, let's buy an EV because we want to do the right thing for climate change, But gasoline is one of only 6,000 products that come from a barrel of oil. The asphalt that makes the roads, the tires, the plastic that is in a Tesla, those all come also from oil. And then finally, so far the energy transition has been more of an energy addition. This chart shows the total scaled by color amount of energy that humans have used in the last 220 years. The green is biomass. And by the way, we're now using more biomass globally than we were before we found fossil carbon. Then there's coal, then oil, then gas, then nuclear, hydropower, wind, solar, etc. Total global energy consumption continues to increase. We are increasing renewables faster in percentage terms than we're increasing fossils, but we're still growing the aggregate of fossils. We just hit an all-time high in coal production in the world 3 months ago. Materials. Energy is important. Materials are also important. There is a very tight link globally, and this is different for individual countries, but the link globally between energy and GDP is 99.1% correlated, and the link between GDP and materials is 100% correlated. So the purple line shows the biophysical footprint, and the red line shows GDP globally. Since we're growing renewables faster than we're growing the economy, the emissions still go up, but at a lower rate. So right now, all of the built infrastructure in the world, all the buildings, the asphalt, the pavements, the museum, the sports stadiums, everything that humans developed outweighs all living things on the world. Not just animals, but trees, grass, shrubs, everything. Plastic is twice as heavy as all the animals on Earth alone. Now, decarbonization, which is the current theme, will lead to a rematerialization. And this is a problem because a lot of areas in the world where the minerals are already having poverty problems, higher wet bulb temperatures, civil strife, etc. And we can't just assume that to increase our electric vehicle capacity that we go to Bolivia or Madagascar or some of these other places. This is a real issue. The concept of energetic remoteness. This graph in the red shows, the blue shows the copper production in the country of Chile, which is the largest producer of copper in the world. And the red shows how much energy they needed to get the copper. So everything we're going to do in the world will become more expensive if we can't reduce the energy consumption of industrial processes faster than prices rise. Real quickly, since you're innovators and investors, you talk about building a mine. Mines take incredibly long time to build, and a new copper or whatever mine, and this is popular in Canada, takes 16 years to build a new mine from when it's originally commissioned. Okay, technology. Each unit of GDP absolutely requires three things: energy, materials, and information or technology. But there's two broad categories of technology. The first, type 1, is a way to make solar panels more efficient, or to take a coal plant and have a little bit less coal to get the same amount of electricity, or some new energy find that we can't imagine. Type 2 is replacing things that humans used to do manually, like driving a car instead of walking, or new resource conversions like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things like that. Type 2 energy dominates our new technology every year, so what ends up happening is we have a larger and larger baseline of devices and things that require energy next year because of technology. We do get more efficient. Humans have gotten approximately 1.2% more efficient every year on how much energy goes into $1 of GDP globally. This shows the efficiency chart over the last 200 years. But if you superimpose our energy use during that time, it continues to grow. So more efficiency under this global system has resulted in more energy use. We've become 36% more energy efficient since 1990, but energy consumption has increased by 63%. This is called the backfire effect. Okay, briefly on money. Economic textbooks including the University of Chicago, teach us that money is lent from existing capital. And the reality is that 80% of money is lent into existence. Commercial banks and governments don't lend money, they create it. And this is a mind bomb if you haven't looked into this. Again, this is like a full hour presentation. Like John said, there's lots behind this. So conceptually, how does that fit into this model? This was our ancestors over time. We used the biogeochemical flows of the sun, the rain, the soil, and we reached capacity limits of the earth. And then there's a different sort of curve, a Gaussian or normal distribution where there's a non-renewable resource that we find and we started to extract it, and we reach a peak at some point and then it declines, and the ultimate curve looks like this. Then like the carbon pulse would be a curve like that. Then we had a human construct, which is credit, digital money, and paper money that we created and put on top of all this. So what ended up happening is as we had this giant bolus of fossil energy surplus into our economies, the classical economist 100 years ago said, oh my God, we're so smart and clever. They jettisoned any explanation of land or land productivity from the economic models. And it was all just capital and labor. Energy and raw materials had no special explanatory value. And using the social construct of credit, we pulled resource consumption forward in time. So we create debt much faster than we create GDP. We're doubling our debt as a world every 8.5 years, and we're doubling our GDP, which is the income stream needed to service the debt every 25 years. So we're stretching this tether to biophysical reality. In the past 10 years, government debt has grown 60%, corporate debt 50%, household debt 40%. So there was an old reality when debt didn't really matter. Now we are basically transmuting wealth into income by continually goosing the debt. And what ends up happening, all the Canadian or US dollars you have in your pocket or your bank account, when you spend it, it's a claim on energy. So if money's a claim on energy, then debt is a claim on future energy. And what we're doing is the red line is we're going to more and more debt. The United States is adding $1 trillion in debt every 4 months, while our same amount of oil, copper, timber, dolphins, ecosystems is the same or declining, and the delta between these is increasing. So we're papering over our problems with more and more credit while the energetic and material basis for our currencies deplete. Okay, pollution. I think given the hands, I'm not going to spend much time talking about climate change, but climate is just one of many of our environmental problems. We've lost 70% of the average animal population since I was born on this planet. Right now, sperm count is dropping 1.5% to 2% in humans and other species due to endocrine disrupting chemicals. 0.5% of our, in this room, brain weight by weight is microplastics. There are lots of environmental problems beyond just climate, and I'm sure you're very aware of it. But those things that are not priced into our economic system are seriously important and not included in our conversations. Feelings. Why do we do all this? Because we're trying to match the emotional states of our successful ancestors. And status is really important. So the proximate reason that we want to innovate and make things is so that we make money. But the ultimate reason is we want to be respected and feel part of doing something important that other people recognize the value. We want to have high status in our tribe. We care about the present more than the future. We have a list of cognitive biases longer than my arm. We get hijacked by supernormal stimuli, where in our ancestral environment, dopamine led to actual reward. Now we get the reward without having to do the work with porn or hamburgers or gambling or stock options or all this stuff. So we're a species out of context, but we're still trying to get the same neurotransmitter cocktails of our ancestors on the Pleistocene. Okay, so how do you tie all this together, the superorganism? We do this, and we do it every year at a higher and higher level, which we call growth. So in nature, you've seen these starlings, which are a bird, and they all fly together in the sky, and they follow 3 simple rules. Do what your neighbors do. Don't get too close, but fly towards the center. And what ends up happening is an emergent property that looks like this. Humans are similar. We coordinate towards acquiring surplus, which is tethered to money. We spend the surplus, and we pursue culturally accepted behavior. What ends up happening is an emergent property that is not too dissimilar from an ant colony or a termite colony. If you take an aerial view of Los Angeles, the brake lights and the headlights of the cars are not too dissimilar than the hemoglobin of the veins and the arteries in a human body, transporting goods and services around based on oil and gasoline. And this happens globally. So human culture, not on purpose, this is an emergent property that happened with our historical genome, coupled with this unbelievable era of drawing down ancient sunlight, is acting like an energy dissipating structure, a mindless superorganism akin to a blind, hungry amoeba. Trying to mitigate climate change within existing economic structures is like arguing with a forest fire. There is no one driving this bus, not politicians, not the rich and powerful, because we have outsourced our wisdom to the financial markets. And the financial markets cannot value what we really value. So, one of the gentlemen on stage is talking about artificial intelligence. Here's my view on that. Just like shale technology is functioning as a larger straw, AI is going to act like a larger straw in all these ecosystem aspects. If it scales, big caveat, under our current economic system, more servers, more productivity, more profits will get funneled into the larger system. So I have a great podcast, it's 3 hours long, on AI and artificial intelligence and the superorganism and ecology. I don't think this is talked about enough at a high enough scale on what impact AI is going to have on the global ecology. Because the people that are inventing AI are looking out for their own self-interest without looking at the Earth-size map of what the implications are. And again, John has never seen any of what I'm presenting here today, so if you have tomatoes to throw them at me, not at John. Okay, implications and scenarios. So under this framing, what is not likely to happen? Growing the economy and mitigating climate change is 6 mass extinction. Growing the economy by replacing fossil fuels with renewables. Culture en masse choosing to leave fossil carbon in the ground. Governments embracing limits to growth before limits to growth are well past. What is likely to happen? Growth in gross energy, while the net energy declines. Massive monetary creation and financial market support by central banks and governments. Wider, deeper poverty and inequality. AI accelerates energy and environmental problems. A rightward shift in politics, and that's because when things change, people like to be the way things were before, and progressives are progressive. So as things change and get chaotic, people get a little bit more worried and vote conservative, which hasn't happened everywhere in the last year, but a lot of places in Europe this has started to happen. A reduction in global environmental regulations. I mean, look at Kamala Harris now saying, no, I'm pro drilling for oil, and she's backtracking on a lot of things because the economy is more important to more people than the environment. Pedal to the metal until we hit a wall. So what are the scenarios? One scenario is green growth, which I think is an oxymoron because the more we grow, the more these wide boundary externalities are in. The 2 is what I call the Mordor economy, a play on Lord of the Rings, which is when our economy grows with AI and new innovation, but what ends up happening is a larger and larger fraction of our economy is directed to the energy material mining sector, and a larger percentage gets directed towards environmental remediation from climate change and floods and different things. So let me briefly talk about that. Some of you may think that, what the heck, John invited a Malthusian to this conference. So let's look at this chart historically. That first red line was when Thomas Malthus lived on the planet, and he said that demand for food would outstrip how much we could grow. He was wrong, because he didn't know about fossil carbon and how that would combine with machines. This next red line was 1969. Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb, predicting many of the same things. He was wrong, because he didn't know, at least about that he was wrong. He didn't know about debt, and he didn't know about globalization and outsourcing. Then 2008, we had the great financial crash, when central banks took over the role of money creation from commercial banks. We had COVID in 2020, where there was this super bazooka of the governments bailing out and buying things in the financial market. We are able to kick cans. But which cans will be left to kick in the future? My own belief is the next can to kick is in our minds and how we can use energy and materials towards less material throughput, lifestyles, as Michelle said, in service of life. But how many cans are left to kick? If we grow at 3% a year, we double the energy and materials by 2050, and none of you said that would be a good thing. Or maybe one of you did. The third category is what I call the Great Simplification, which is the name of my podcast and the name of my work, which is at some point when we remove low productivity credit with a shift towards lower productivity energy and resources and return to what renewable energy actually can do, there is a sharp decline because we've kicked so many cans financially that there's this Wile E. Coyote burden on the financial system. So I would say that eventually, one of the next 3 recessions will be a depression. I call it the Great Simplification because it's the opposite of what we've done on the upside of the carbon pulse, which is a complexification. So of these, and then the fourth category is Mad Max, which is a non-controlled Great Simplification. So in our cultural narratives, if we talk about what are people thinking and how do they talk about the future, the percentages are like this. The most people think green growth, and these other 3 categories are very small in our brain space. I think the odds are something like this, but the longer that we have a Mordor economy where we grow using the current aspirations and goals, the more likely the Mad Max becomes. Okay, summary, main points, and I am going to get to some direction for your work and all of our work. Long-term, with humans, growth was not the norm. We're alive during a very unique exponential growth period. For long periods of time in the last 2,000 years, we had flat to declining periods of economic growth. All of the economic and MBA finance models that exist today were invented in this blue circle area. Cheap, abundant fossil fuel energy underpins our societies and expectations. This is a stock that our cultural stories have treated as a flow. And since it takes a generation or more to deplete and decline, we don't think about it. So we have conflated the proximate drivers of progress and growth with the ultimate drivers. Most people talk about politics and technology and money, and these are all important, but they sit on top of 100 billion barrels per year of fossil energy powering our society, and that sits on top of a viable biosphere. We are now exceeding many of the planetary boundaries, not just climate change, and we're leaving the stability of the Holocene, which has existed for the last 10,000 years. As long as growing GDP is our cultural goal, better technology will tend to grow, not shrink, global CO2 emissions and impact. The real energy transition, according to Nate, will mostly not be about energy types. It will be about how we use energy and how we relate to each other and to the natural world differently. Barring a new boost in productivity from AI, which is definitely possible, growth is likely soon over, and the first challenge will be responding to a financial recalibration to a lower material throughput. We're going to have to use less on average in the not too distant future. But rather than go that route, rather than choose austerity and being voted out of office, governments, central banks will support consumption by printing and monetizing debt, leading to currency debasement. We do not face a resource shortage, but rather a long edge of expectations. The average person in the United States and Canada uses 215,000 kilocalories per day of energy, including the planes, the lights, everything, where our bodies only need 1/100th of that. So if I ask each of you, what are the 5 best memories of your life? I would bet, if prior audiences are any guide, most of those would have to do with family or in nature or seeing some reindeer or playing cards and having some beers with a bunch of your friends. They're not going to be incredibly monetary or energy intense experiences. Renewables and technology are the right answer to the wrong question. Renewables are amazing for what they can do right now. They cannot power a 19 terawatt, which is 190 billion light bulbs turned on 24/7 on the planet, and regenerating that every 20 years. There's a biophysical phase shift occurring right now in global politics. Russia and the BRICS nations produce 50% plus of the exportable oil in the world. Tomorrow morning I have a podcast out with Jeffrey Sachs, and we talk about the unbelievable near-term danger of a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. The United States has had a unipolar lead, and now we're moving to a multipolar world, and can we do that peacefully? Climate change is not the problem, but it's a symptom of a much larger dynamic, which is called ecological overshoot. This predicament that I'm presenting to John Stokes' friends and colleagues today cannot yet be voiced in politics and media. This is a scene from the movie Don't Look Up. It is the mother of all cognitive dissonances because we've got our lifestyles, our plans, our companies, our identities are attached to something that if you take on board everything I'm saying today, there's a big old dissonance that feels uncomfortable. It's my hope that actually these presentations dispel that dissonance, and most importantly, forget about me, that you all continue to talk about this and incorporate it in your discussions. Our current resource tech balance sheet can power a great culture and civilization, just not this one. Okay, ways forward for innovation, impact, and investing. Before we answer that, we have to answer for whom? The rich, well-off countries and people? The poorer countries and people? Michelle mentioned non-humans, other species, and the unborn, humans and other species, because the answers and the responses are different for these 4 categories. So we are now somewhere on this green line, and that creates 3 distinct timelines for interventions. One is now, before some financial Wile E. Coyote moment arrives, what do we do? The other is that bend not break moment, and there needs to be a lot of planning about that. And then what is it once we land, once we get to the circle in the future diagram that Michelle had you draw? What does that look like? We need people working on all 3 categories. The vast, vast majority of VC and innovators are in this red line without any awareness of the possibility of these other trajectories. And I don't ask you to believe me on this stuff. If you think this is 10% plausible, what I'm saying today, at least that should influence the scenario conversations in your organization, in your life. Okay, so what do? I don't think there are any solutions. I prefer the word responses. The ocean of human and planetary futures. Okay, so what should innovators do? Well, before I answer that, first of all, it's not all up to you. There are some things upstream and downstream of your work. First of all, we have to have some sort of geopolitical negotiation and governance. Otherwise, there's 13,000 nuclear warheads, and on the downslope of the carbon pulse, that needs to be managed. We also have a cultural aspiration of more and more stuff is our GDP, and GDP does not necessarily correlate with well-being. It does if you have very little GDP, but once you're above 100 gigajoules per capita, it flatlines. The prices are wrong. We're paying pennies on this non-renewable resource that we're drawing out of the ground millions of times faster than it was sequestered. So we could have a different pricing structure where things that are non-renewable are taxed right when they come out of the ground. And things that are renewable, like human labor or solar panel installation, are not taxed. As one example. So my cell phone might cost 3,000 Canadian dollars, but I can repair it, I can reuse it, And these are the sorts of things that we're going to have to start thinking about. That's not up to you, but our society needs to come up with plans like that. And we need a bend, not break strategy. This is what, in my work, I call advanced policy, which is the things we're going to need to do when these financial crises arrive, but that are socially and politically too difficult to voice out loud now. What about downstream of innovators? Well, we try to keep up with the Joneses or the Kardashians. We need a different cultural conversation of our individual people. Are we trying to have more stuff than the next guy? Or do we have some maturity and some embodied awareness that most of the best things in life are free? What do we treat as sacred? Are we going to draw a line in the sand and say no to these forests, these redwood trees? No, this is sacred to us. These millions of other species we share this one blue-green earth with. Do we change what we care about? It's an open question. Again, these are two of my college friends. That's my dog who likes to have stories read to her. I was just in India. I listened to all kinds of birds and educated young kids. I mean, we have to have a different cultural aspiration that we've got all this reward without the internal embodiment of serotonin and oxytocin and other things. We're approaching a species level conversation. This is a picture of the Cave of the Hands, which is 15,000 years ago. This now, what comes after the superorganism? Some new mitochondria. Humans are innovators. We always have been and we always will be. But innovating more gadgets to power the superorganism is largely a dead end, and we need the innovators to start thinking horizontally and vertically what this new mitochondria might look like. So what should innovators be doing? 3 distinct timelines. We need people to be working on the yellow and the green, at least in their mind. Here's the problem, that all of you in this room wear 3 hats. You want to make successful investments in technology, you want to live a good life with your family, and you want to contribute to better futures for society and for the natural world. The problem is the market doesn't allow you to wear all 3 of those hats. It only rewards products in the first category. And so we need some new cultural alliance where a person, like we're looking at the future circle versus the now circle, can start to act like that future circle, but embody those actions today. We don't have that yet. Goldilocks Technology. Not too hot and not too cold. Too hot would be some drone that drops donuts at your kid's birthday party, and too cold would be like stone tools. Here's a short list, given what I've presented today, of what you should think about would conform to a Goldilocks technology. Be conscious of energy inputs, because at some point in the not too distant future, energy is going to get a lot more expensive, and that's going to ripple through supply chains and your own products. Conscious of ecological impacts. Maybe we will include externalities in our prices. Simpler inputs as opposed to complex. Clearly, lithium batteries are much better than sodium batteries, but sodium batteries get 70, 80% of the way there with a much simpler input. Shorter supply chains. An increase in the amount of a product's circularity. Affordable and scalable, because a lot of our gadgets like flying cars aren't going to be used by 8 billion people. And what technology is going to be relevant to the category of the Great Simplification, which in my opinion is coming in the not too distant future. And we need to have this simultaneously run with the superorganism, because we can't just live one way. All of us have feet in both worlds. So the market is unstoppable. We make decisions because of the market, but we have to somehow simultaneously have this other thing going. And innovators and VC can play a role in that. Libraries of healing. I don't know about in Canada, but in the United States, the amount of mental health is legion. It is exploding. Mental health issues. And I just think every community should have a place where people can not only have food, but they can be healed I had a week in California last week, and I sat in a circle with some friends, and we just had no technology and nothing for 9 hours, and we shared outside in this forest, and we're missing the real human things. Technology is pulling away our humanity. So I really think that healing is going to be a huge industry. Reducing complexity. When we reduce complexity as a person or as a country, there's a short-term cost, because if Germany and France has to reduce the complexity of their economies while the rest of the world carries on, there's a cost to doing that. If you, as individuals, simplify first and beat the rush, there is an immediate cost to your status and maybe even your dopamine. But like the rabbit eventually losing to the tortoise, those areas that somewhat simplify first, ahead of when all this happens, are going to have advantages. We have an incredibly complex 6-continent, globally interconnected, just-in-time, overnight supply chain, which cannot be managed for coming decades given the constraints that I've put. 85% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients to the United States pharmaceutical supply chain come from India or China, as one example. So the future is going to have shorter and simpler supply chains eventually, which means that in Montreal, instead of getting things from South Korea or Hong Kong overnight, you might have to shrink and onshore some of the supply chains, especially for your key ingredients. Here's some additional questions to consider. I've thrown a lot at you. Can a lower scale of energy economy ever come from market-based signals and decisions? I don't think so, but it's an open question. Can we consider remaining high-quality oil and gas as seed corn towards longer-term viable pathways? As the focus moves from climate to economic security, how does society maintain an environmental ethos and focus, which in my value system is what I care the most about? Can we extend the time horizon for investments and politics beyond quarterly, yearly election cycles? Can we do the above without further burdening the global south or accelerating the decline of natural systems? And then a question for you all, even if you believe a third of what I've said today, what might you change in your job, your innovation plans, and your life after hearing this? We've arrived at a species-level conversation. The stakes are really no less than power or life. Ilya Prigogine said, when a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. From a truly wide boundary perspective, this is where we all are today. This was a picture taken a couple weeks ago from Voyager. That is the planet that we all reside on. Thank you.